Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome back.
Good morning.
Welcome back, and let me congratulate you on getting through your first lecture exam of the semester. I was very pleased with the class average. I thought as a collective group you did very well. So good job on that. If you'd like to review your exam with me, please come see me during office hours. We can go through it question by question and talk about things that are relevant for your situation. So anyway, good job, everybody. We're going to get started in chapter 5 today, which is the integumentary system. Before I do that, do you have any questions you'd like to ask? Okay, welcome back. I hope you're doing okay this morning. Let's see if we can introduce chapter 5 to you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. All right. And our note-taking document is up. Okay, so chapter 5, the title of chapter 5 is the integumentary system. In my edition of the textbook, which I have a printed book, I have a physical book. This begins on page 149, and you see a photograph there of a person who's had an unfortunate situation with a horrible burn, right? A horrible burn on the surface of their skin. So let's talk about the integumentary system and what it is actually made up of. For right now, probably a good reference point in your textbook is to be looking at figure 5.1, figure 5.1. Okay, so let's define what we mean by the integumentary system. What is the integumentary system made of? Okay, so the integumentary system is composed of skin. When people think about the integumentary system, they almost always think of the skin, and you know what? That's a reasonable thing. However, it's important that you appreciate that there are other things that are included in the phrase integumentary system. So the integumentary system is composed of skin. It's composed of hair. Okay. If you look at figure 5.1, you can see hair that's coming out of the skin. Okay, so the hair comes through the skin. You see the hair shafts that are in figure 5.1. The integumentary system will also include oil and sweat glands. If you're looking at figure 5.1 and you look at the list of terms along the left side of the image, you will see sebaceous glands there, right? Sebaceous gland is the 5th term down on the left side of figure 5.1. Sebaceous gland would be an oil gland. And then below that, several terms down, you also have 2 different types of sweat glands. And I'm pointing these things out that these structures that we're putting in your notes are in some way associated with the anatomy of the skin. So the integumentary system is composed of the skin, as you think about it, the hair that pushes through the skin, the oil and sweat glands that are in the dermal layer of the skin. The integumentary system will also include nails. Okay, now nails are also associated with your skin, right? I mean, if you look at your fingernails, okay, obviously the fingernails are coming out immediately underneath your skin. And so actually the precursor cells that build your nails as you look at them are actually made of a form of epithelial cell. Okay, so nails are part of the epithelium. Nails are part of the integumentary system. And in addition to that, we would include sensory receptors. Okay, so all of these things are things that you should be aware of when you're thinking about the integumentary system: skin, hair, oil and sweat glands, nails, and sensory receptors. When we say sensory receptors, of course, referring to nerve endings, right? Neurons that communicate information into the central nervous system. All right. Now the term dermatology. No problem, Shay. I see your comment in the chat window, and welcome this morning. Okay, so dermatology is the medical specialty that deals with the diagnosis and treatment of integumentary system disorders. You know, so there's lots of things that you might go to a dermatologist for, right? You might be someone that suffers with psoriasis, right? You might be someone that suffers with excessive dandruff. You might be someone that has problems with excessive sweating, so you need a special antiperspirant of a medical grade quality antiperspirant. So there's lots of things that would be a reason for why you would go to a dermatologist. Absolutely, Courtney. Acne would be another reason, right? If folks are having trouble managing their acne, might go see a dermatologist. Okay, good job. Okay, so folks, what we're going to start doing is going into a description of the skin. What is the skin structure? How is the skin organized? What is the skin made of? Okay. All right, so a couple talking points here. You probably appreciate that the skin is an organ, right? The skin qualifies as an organ, right? What's an organ? A three-dimensional object. The skin is a three-dimensional object. It's made of multiple different tissues. Well, the skin is made of multiple different tissues. It's made of epithelium. It's made of connective tissue. You're also going to find muscle tissue in it around the hair fibers. That's what gives us goose pimples at times. You're also going to find sensory receptors that are part of the nervous system. So the skin is made of cells that are part of all four major tissue categories. So the skin is an organ. The skin is the largest organ of the body in terms of weight and surface area. Okay. All right. So from a formal perspective, and I'm going to keep referring to figure 5.1 because I think this is probably the best visualization in this chapter that I can give you when we're talking about what do we find in the skin. So it gives you a way to think about the structure of the skin. The skin is made of two major layers of tissue, two major layers of cells, formerly called the epidermis and dermis. Please take a look at those things. On figure 5.1, along the right side of the image, you see two brackets there that say epidermis and dermis. The skin is made of put it this way, the skin is made of, and then letter A, the epidermis. Okay, this is going to be the topmost layer of your skin. Topmost or most superficial layer of the skin. Of course, the epidermis is made of many, many cells stacked on top of each other, which we're going to go into in just a moment. And underneath or deep to the epidermis, you see the dermis, okay? All right. Now, when you say the phrase epidermis, please be aware that epidermis is simply specialized epithelium. That's all it is. So the epidermis is epithelium in your skin. Okay, so you might ask yourself, well, if the epidermis is simply epithelium, why do I need to call it epidermis? Why can't I just call it epithelium? And you would have a legitimate point. But as you begin to appreciate, when you study a topic, as we focus on specific things, we get customized vocabulary, customized words that refer to specific things, right? Epithelium, as you know from chapter 4, could be coating the inner lining of a blood vessel, but it can also be making up the surface of your skin. So if we're talking about the epithelium that happens to be part of the surface of your skin, then we give it the special name epidermis. So epidermis is epithelium, but we're going to call it epidermis because epidermis is the proper word to use when we're talking specifically about the skin. So the epidermis is epithelium in your skin, and the dermis is tissue that is underneath the epidermis. It is deep to the epidermis, and it is made of connective tissue. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to put a caution sign here, a caution or a warning here. Okay, your skin is made of the epidermis and dermis, and you see that in figure 5.1. Along the right side, you see the brackets, epidermis and dermis. If you look very carefully, there's another bracket underneath dermis, and it's called subcutaneous tissue. All right. You will find that there are educational materials, there are textbooks, there are videos that will say that the skin also includes the subcutaneous tissue. Our textbook says that the skin does not include the subcutaneous tissue. Let me prove that to you, okay? As you look at figure 5.1, look at panel C and E in your textbook, and there is some text written on page, for my book is page 151, that talks about this. So folks, let me ask you in the chat window, I'm looking you to find some textual information. So do you see the paragraph in your textbook near the pictures of figure 5.1 C and E that start with the words, here they go, deep to the dermis? Do you see that? Do you see the paragraph in your textbook near the pictures of figure 5.1 C and E that start with the words deep to the dermis? Do you see that? How about the rest of you? Okay, take a look, right? The textbook should be open. It should be available. You should be scanning it at this time. Okay. All right. So I have 2 people saying yes, 3, 4. Okay, how about the rest of you? Okay, good. All right. So if you see that, let's just read that first sentence there. Notice it says deep to the dermis, but not part of the skin, is the subcutaneous tissue. Okay, so our book says that the subcutaneous tissue is not part of the skin. You will find other educational materials that say it is part of the skin, and I'm going to tell you why our book says it's not part of the skin. But before I do that, let me type this out into your notes. Okay, the layer of tissue deep to the dermis, which is known as the subcutaneous layer, or it's also known as the hypodermis, is not considered part of skin. Here's the reason. The reason is this. Then when we think about the cells that we find in a typical organ, whether that organ be the heart, whether that organ be the kidney, whether that organ be the skin, the cells are part of an organ, share a common ancestry. There's a common precursor cell in the lineage of the tissue that differentiated into all the cells that became the organ. And what scientists have discovered is that the cells of the hypodermis do not share an obvious ancestor with cells of the epidermis and dermis. So from a scientific perspective, the hypodermis is not considered part of the skin because there's no evolutionary relatedness between the cells of the subcutaneous layer and cells of the dermal or epidermal layers. Okay. This is because cells of the subcutaneous layer do not share a common ancestor with cells of the epidermis and dermis. Okay? All right. Okay, folks. Any questions right now? Okay. All right. So next, what we're going to do is start telling you about some of the types of cells that you would find in the epidermis. So I'm going to ask you to turn the page in your book to page 152 and take a look at figure 5.2. Figure 5.2. Cells found in the epidermis. This will not be an exhaustive list because there are more cells than are listed in figure 5.2 in the epidermis. But this is just going to get our toes in the water, so to speak. Okay, so the epidermis is made of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Question in the chat window. Okay, Israel, I see your question. Can you tell me what you're referring to with your question? Okay. So my question to everybody is, so Israel, in my textbook, page 152 has figure 5.2. That's what I need you to find is figure 5.2. So question coming in the chat window, what category of organic macromolecule does keratin belong to? What category of organic macromolecule does keratin belong to? Okay. All right, thank you, Kendall. It is in fact a protein, right? And the reality of it is that there's a lot of keratin protein in our epithelial cells at the surface of our skin. The keratin protein provides sort of resistance to abrasion at the surface of your skin. It provides a little bit of a structural integrity, a little bit of toughness to the skin. Okay, so the epidermis is made of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium with the following subtypes of cells. Okay, first we have the keratinocytes. Okay, keratinocytes are epithelial cells that make a lot of keratin protein, and again, they contribute to abrasion resistance for the structure of the skin. These cells are characterized by the abundance of keratin that they manufacture. Okay, melanocytes would be next. I bet you've heard of melanocytes. Melanocytes are characterized by a special pigment that they manufacture called melanin. Okay. Some of you know that melanin as a pigment contributes to skin color. And while skin color is a characteristic of our skin, the other important feature of melanin that you might be aware of is that melanin as a pigment. Okay, now melanin as a pigment is a molecule that has the ability to absorb ultraviolet radiation. I'm talking about radiation from our sun, right? Sunshine, sunlight. So this melanin pigment is able to absorb ultraviolet radiation and prevent that radiation from damaging the DNA in our skin cells. And by preventing the damage of the DNA of our skin cells, we can help slow down or prevent the development of skin cancer. Okay, so melanin as a molecule, okay, has the ability to absorb UV energy from sunlight and prevent damage to the DNA inside our skin cells. Obviously, it's not 100% effective at all times, because we do know folks that do have skin cancer or had to be treated for skin cancer. I had a second cousin in my family that was in her early 20s when she had a case of skin cancer, right? So it's not always correlated to age either. So at any rate, melanin does generally protect our cells' DNA. Okay. Third type of cell that make up the epidermis would be dendritic cells. That's panel C. Courtney, I see your comment in the chat window, and thank you for sharing. I hope your mom will be okay. Dendritic cells are also known as Langerhans cells. Okay, dendritic cells are also known as Langerhans cells. Okay, these cells are immune system defense cells. That help protect our skin from microorganisms and pathogens that might want to cause us harm. Okay, so dendritic cells are a type of defense cell. Okay, and actually I want to come back to the topic of immune system properties of the skin in just a moment. I have a video I want to show you, but let's finish our list of cells out here. So dendritic cells are also known as Langerhans cells. They are defense cells of the skin. And then there's a fourth category of cell in your books called a tactile epithelial cell. Tactile epithelial cells are also known as Merkel cells. Okay. The purpose of the tactile epithelial cell is to create contact between the surface of the skin and the sensory neurons embedded in the skin. So in other words, these cells help convey sensations of touch at the surface of the skin to the sensory neurons, which then relay that information to your brain. And so you can tell when somebody is giving you a hug. You can tell when somebody's lightly rubbing a finger across the surface of the arm. You can tell when somebody's touching the hair on your arm. That's due to the tactile epithelial cells communicating the sensation to the neuron, which then transmits it to the central nervous system, which then gives you a conscious awareness of what's happening at the surface of your body. Okay, so these cells communicate sensations of touch to neurons that ultimately give us conscious awareness of sensations happening at the surface of our skin. Okay. All right, folks. So there you have 4 types of cells that collectively make up the epidermis, right? The epidermis is made of many rows of cells, and each row of cells can have different kinds of cells present, and they collectively make up what we call the epidermal layer of the skin. Do you have any questions right now? Okay, so folks, I want to come back to this idea of cells in your epidermis being part of your body defense. Okay, so we just said that dendritic cells, which are also known as Langerhans cells, are part of your body's defense. Okay, and so I have a video about the immune system and how it operates in the skin, and I'm going to run this video and show it to you. Okay, so let me get the link for this video into your notes here so that you can watch it again in your own private study time. Okay, so I have that taken care of. So you can watch it again on your own. Okay, but let's watch it here. And what I'd like you to pay attention to is, first off, the layering of cells in the epidermis and what happens to the layering of cells when new cells are manufactured. Additionally, take a look at some of the defense cells that are described in the video. The video is going to seem very foreign to you. It's going to be like somebody took you to the planet Mars and dropped you off, and you're like, what is all this stuff around me? Okay, it's going to seem very foreign to you the first time you watch it, but that's okay. There's still value in seeing it and being exposed to these new ways of thinking. Okay, all right, so let's run this video and then we'll come back and we can talk about it. Here we go, folks.
The skin is the body's primary barrier against physical insults and microbial pathogens. It represents a unique environment in which immune cells interact with skin cells to maintain tissue homeostasis and induce immune responses. The skin is composed of epidermis, dermis, and a subcutaneous fatty region. Commensal bacteria, fungi, and viruses living on the skin have beneficial effects in the protection against pathogens and in wound healing. The epidermis is composed of highly specialized epithelial cells known as keratinocytes. They are continuously replenished from just one layer of basal keratinocytes, which divide frequently. Dead cells called corneocytes form the outermost layer and are largely responsible for the barrier function of the skin. In the dermis, cells known as fibroblasts secrete elastin and collagen fibers that form a dense extracellular matrix. Blood capillaries irrigate the dermis, while lymph fluid is drained through lymphatic vessels to lymph nodes, specialized immune structures in which immune cells are activated after pathogen encounter. Diverse and functionally specialized immune cells populate the skin. In the epidermis, a specialized subset of dendritic cells, called Langerhans cells, sample antigen. They project dendrites upward towards the cornified epithelial layer and sample bacterial antigen such as toxins. Langerhans cells appear to be both anti-inflammatory and activatory depending on context. Dendritic cells in the dermis are highly efficient at capturing dead cells and presenting antigen, such as viruses, other intracellular pathogens, or skin-associated self-antigen, to T cells. If dendritic cells are the immune sentinels, T cells are the immune effectors. Healthy skin contains more than twice the number of T cells found in the blood. Most of them are memory T cells that have previously encountered antigen and can be rapidly reactivated. T cells in the epidermis are mostly CD8 T cells, a subset that becomes cytotoxic and kill target cells upon activation. They're long-term residents in the epidermis, mostly disconnected from the circulation. T cells in the dermis are mostly helper CD4 T cells, which have a more modulatory role in the immune response. a variety of other immune cells, such as natural killer cells, eosinophils, and mast cells, are present in the dermis and might be involved in allergic reactions in the skin. Dendritic cells and keratinocytes sense tissue damage, such as wounds or cold sore lesions that occur when latent herpes virus reactivates, and they do that through evolutionarily conserved receptors that recognize pathogen-derived molecular patterns or host-derived molecules that are exposed by cell death, such as DNA. Keratinocytes produce antimicrobial peptides, which can kill bacteria directly, inflammatory mediators, such as interleukin-1 or IL-1, which activate dendritic cells, and chemokines, which recruit neutrophils, macrophages, and T cells. Activated dendritic cells migrate to the lymph nodes, where they present antigen from the site of infection to naive T cells, priming them to activate and differentiate into effector T cells. Activated T cells return to the skin and kill infected keratinocytes to control viral infection or secrete signals that recruit additional immune effector cells. Following viral clearance, memory CD8 T cells persist in the epidermis to provide immunity for future encounters with the same virus. Immune responses can become dysregulated and cause skin disorders such as psoriasis or atopic dermatitis. Psoriasis is a lifelong inflammatory skin disease characterized by scaly reddish plaques. A combination of environmental and genetic factors confers susceptibility to the disease. Physical injury or inflammation can trigger the formation of an acute lesion. The antigenic trigger is unknown, but current models propose that stressed keratinocytes might release self-DNA, which in complex with an antimicrobial peptide activates dermal plasmacytoid dendritic cells to secrete high amounts of the antiviral mediator interferon. Together with pro-inflammatory IL-1 alpha released by stressed keratinocytes, interferon activates dermal dendritic cells to promote T cell differentiation. The earliest recognizable change in the affected skin is the accumulation of T cells and dendritic cells around blood vessels in the dermis. An overt lesion occurs when CD8 T cells, dendritic cells, and neutrophils infiltrate the epidermis. Specialized subsets of T cells secrete soluble mediators like interferon gamma and IL-17, which stimulate the proliferation of keratinocytes, and this produces a marked thickening of the epidermis. Signals from the proliferating keratinocytes act as chemoattractants for infiltrating neutrophils. Crosstalk between immune cells, keratinocytes, and dermal cells thus contributes to tissue remodeling and amplification of this dysregulated immune response. Without treatment, acute psoriatic lesions become chronic lesions. Genetic studies have identified psoriasis-associated susceptibility genes, some of them linking Th17 cells, the subset of T cells that produce IL-17, to psoriasis pathogenesis. Thus, immune cells in the skin exert important roles in maintaining the barrier function against pathogens, but can also become activated by self-antigen or harmless antigen to cause autoimmunity or allergies.
Okay, folks. So let me just ask you a quick question in the chat window. Okay. As you watched the video, did it seem like you were watching a very strange science fiction movie? Okay. And the point I'm trying to get across here is, these are the things that we don't have an everyday common way to think about, right? Because sometimes we don't even know what our body is made of, and we have no concept of the reality of the cellular and molecular processes happening in our organs and our tissues, certainly at the surface of our skin here, okay? So first off, let me tell you, do not be worried that I'm going to expect you to understand that video. I don't expect you to understand the video. The video is really about the immune system functioning of the skin. And the immune system is a topic that you will get in A&P2 next semester. But still, I think it is valuable to look at some of these things and start to be aware of what's really happening inside your body. Okay. Okay. Kendall, thank you for your comment. I'm glad that you found the video helpful. Yeah, Raquel, I can put that video link in the chat. It's also in your notes at this point that you're going to get, but let me do that. Okay, so hold on a sec. Okay, so the video link, which is in your class notes, is also now in the chat window. Okay. All right. Okay, so don't worry about having a deep understanding of the video, but use the video as a way to start visualizing what the anatomy of your skin really is like and start to frame your thinking in your mind about the immense complexity of the skin. It's not just this dumb stuff that happens to cover the surface of our body. It's living, dynamic cells. Okay. All right. Okay, so we've now talked about the cells we find in the epidermis. We've given you a list of 4 major players: keratinocytes, melanocytes, dendritic cells, which are involved in the defense aspects of your skin, and the tactile epithelial cells involved in the sensations that we perceive on the surface of our skin, like someone giving us a hug or something like this. Now, notes would be incomplete if I didn't at least talk to you about the layers of the epidermis. So we're going to transition our conversation to figure 5.3. We've talked about the cells in the epidermis. Now I'm going to talk about the layers of the epidermis. The layers are made of the cells stacked on top of each other, and these layers are given special names. Okay, so let's continue here. All right. Number 4. So let's see, for number 3, I should definitely reference figure 5.2 for you. And for number 4 here, we're going to talk about layers of the epidermis. That's going to be figure 5.3. Okay. So in terms of the epidermis, you're typically going to find 4 or 5 layers of epidermis. Some areas of skin will only have 4 layers, other areas of skin will have 5 layers, and the difference is the location of the skin of your body, whether that location is being exposed to abrasive forces that produce a lot of friction. Okay. For example, if you walk around barefoot in the summertime, what do you notice on the bottom of your feet, right? The bottom of your feet start to form calluses. They always have calluses, but if you're walking around a lot barefoot, those calluses even become tougher, they even become thicker. So any area of the body where you're going to develop callus, you're going to have 5 layers of epidermis as opposed to 4 layers of epidermis, okay? So we'll get to that in the notes. In terms of the conversation here, I'm going to take figure 5.3, and if you look at figure 5.3 along the right side, you see a double-headed vertical arrow, superficial to deep. Folks, I'm going to start at the deep layer, and I'm going to progressively work my way upwards towards the surface of your skin, okay? So this is going to be a conversation that goes from deep to superficial. Okay, deep to superficial. All right, so the deepest layer of the epidermis is called the stratum-based cell. Okay, the stratum-based cell. The stratum-based cell is made of a single individual row of cuboidal or sometimes columnar-shaped keratinocytes. This is the deepest layer of the epidermis. Is made of a single row of cuboidal keratinocytes. And what's important that you appreciate, the stratum-based cell is actually the layer of the epidermis where you find your stem cells. The stratum-based cell contains stem cells which produce new skin cells, produce new cells of the epidermis. So the stratum-based cell contains stem cells which are responsible for reproducing and replacing old epidermal cells that die and eventually are removed from the body, right? We slough skin cells off the surface of our body millions of times a day, right? Okay, so the stratum-based cell contains the stem cells, okay? And I was hoping that you saw in the video in moments when it was showing you activity in the epidermis where you noticed where a new cell was being made, did it not in fact bump up other cells towards the surface? So as you made a new cell in the stratum-based cell layer, other cells were progressively pushed up towards the surface. I hope you saw that. If you didn't see that, I'd encourage you to watch the video again and pay attention for when new cells are made, cells on top kind of get bumped further up towards the surface. Okay. All right. All right. So the stratum-based cell is the deepest layer. Next, we have the stratum spinosum. The stratum spinosum is made of typically 8 to 10 rows of cells. And these cells are, they're still metabolically active, but their metabolism is slowing down, okay? Made of cells with a slow metabolism, these cells have very limited reproductive capabilities. And you can see them visually highlighted as the stratum spinosum cells along the left side of figure 5.3. Going ever further towards the surface, we have the stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum is an area that I like to focus on a little bit with this conversation. Stratum granulosum is made of cells that are, this is going to sound strange, made of cells that are in the process of dying. They're made of cells that are actively passing away, okay? This layer of the epidermis is made of cells that are in the process of dying. Okay. The stratum granulosum sort of represents a transition zone, if you will, between deeper layers of cells that are still alive and even more superficial layers of cells that are completely dead. It's kind of a transition zone, kind of a twilight zone of cells that are in that vague twilight of living but almost dead, okay? Because the cells here are in the process of passing away. This layer of cells is a transition zone separating cells that are fully alive from those that are fully dead. Okay. All right. So let me ask a question here. Okay. Karen Anderson. Karen, could I ask you to unmute your microphone and say hi to us, please?
Good morning.
Good morning, Karen. How are you today?
Good, how are you?
Okay, thanks. Hey, Karen, I have a question for you. Why is it that cells in the epidermis, as they progressively move closer to the surface of your body, why is it that they start to die?
They get further away from their food source.
And where is their food source?
Down by the connective tissue layer.
Okay, you're doing really well, Karen. Let me just try to pull you a little bit closer to the answer I'm fishing for. What is in the connective tissue layer, which is the source of the food?
Blood and nerve endings.
Blood, Karen. Very nicely done, right? So the blood in the blood vessels is going to be in the dermal layer, the connective tissue. So the further away we get from that blood supply, the further we get away from our food and our oxygen, and the cells just start to die. Karen, you did a great job. Thank you today.
Thanks.
Okay. Let me get that question into your notes. Why do cells that progressively migrate towards the surface of the body start to die? They are traveling further away from their supply of oxygen and nutrients found in the blood, which resides in the dermal layer of the skin. Okay. Very good. Let's continue here. Okay. So one last thing here. The process that the cells in the stratum granulosum are going through in terms of intentionally dying is actually given a name. There's a form of cell death. It's called programmed cell death, called apoptosis. Cells in the stratum granulosum are executing a genetic program, a genetic plan, which leads ultimately to the death of the cell, and that is called apoptosis. Cells in this layer of the epidermis are following a genetic program of intentional cell death known as apoptosis. Okay, apoptosis. Okay, folks. All right, so next, we're coming towards the surface. We're progressing towards the surface. The fourth layer here that I'm going to put into your notes is the layer that is optional. Not all areas of your skin are going to have it. It's called the stratum lucidum. Okay. The first thing we would say is that the stratum lucidum is only going to be found in areas of the skin that are exposed to physical abrasion and friction. So not all sections of your skin have this layer of cells. Only areas of your skin that are constantly exposed to friction and abrasive forces, such as working with your hands, if you make a living doing a lot of manual labor to build a house, or you work in a factory somewhere and you're touching things constantly, right? You're going to develop calluses on your fingertips, that type of thing. Constantly exposed to friction and abrasive forces, things which produce calluses, will contain this layer of epidermis. Okay. The cells here in the stratum lucidum are completely dead. Okay. So by the time a cell leaves the stratum granulosum and is bumped up into the stratum lucidum layer, it is dead, okay? The cells in this layer are going to have a huge abundance of keratin to help protect the body from physical abrasion. Okay. All right. The final fifth layer, which was shown to you in the video, is the stratum corneum layer. You might recall the video talking about the corneocytes. The corneocytes. Well, the corneocytes are the keratinocytes at the very surface of your skin. They're part of the layering known as the stratum corneum. Okay, so the stratum corneum is the most superficial layer of the epidermis. Again, the cells here are completely dead. They have no metabolism. They have no reproductive capability. It is important that you appreciate that it's these cells at the outermost surface of our skin that are continually shed from the surface of our body millions of times a day. And, you know, some of you might have allergies to dander, which is just sloughed off dead skin cells. You know, lots of folks have allergies to cat and dog dander, right? Which are dead skin cells from the cat and dog that are floating in the air and produce a hypersensitivity in your body. Okay, these cells are sloughed off the surface of the skin millions of times each day. And so, you know, we appreciate that the cells are removed from the surface of our body millions of times a day. We may not appreciate that the detachment of these skin cells is actually a protective mechanism for our body. It's actually a defense mechanism that Mother Nature created for us. So let me explain to you how that works. Okay. Removal of these dead cells represents a defensive strategy for our bodies. Okay. And so let me share with you this idea here, and I'm gonna do a little bit of drawing here if I can. Let's say for a moment that this kind of wavy line here represents the most superficial layer of your skin. And I'm just going to color code things because it makes things easier to understand when there's a little bit of color coding. So let me specifically identify this layering here as having corneocytes of the stratum corneum. Okay, so these are our dead corneocytes here. And I'm just going to make a really large corneocyte here so that you can hopefully see it a little bit better. And the reality of it is, there are things attached to the surface of our skin right now that you are not even aware of is present. And I'm talking about microorganisms that are floating in the air in the room you're in right now, because all air is loaded with microorganisms. I'm talking about mold, fungus, bacteria, viruses, all the variety of microorganisms you would learn about in a typical microbiology course. Some of those things are actually attached to the surface of your skin. even if you took a shower this morning, you would certainly have removed some of them by soap and water on your skin. But as soon as you get back out of the shower and you dry yourself off with your dirty towel that's 3 days old and hasn't been washed, you're putting microbes back on the surface of your skin, and the air in your room is continually passing across the surface of your body. And so we are loaded up with microbes. So we might have a bacterial cell sitting on the surface of a corneocyte. And 99 times out of 100, that bacterial cell will not ever be capable of causing us harm. But that one time out of 100, maybe it does. Okay. At the same time, we might have a virus particle sitting on the surface of our skin. Now, what I'm drawing here is not in any way drawn to scale because I'm not capable of doing that kind of good artwork. Okay, but I'm just telling you that you have microbes loaded on the surface of your skin. We all do. It's not something you can get rid of or avoid in life. So we don't want to be germaphobes. We simply want to be aware of these things. But the point of it is, our body is continually shedding the surface cells from our skin. And if you think for just a moment, you can realize that that really is a protective mechanism, because let's say that this skin cell with a virus happens to slough off the surface of the body. You can appreciate that when it does so, it actually takes the virus particle along for the ride. So by detaching the skin cells from the surface of the body, we are also removing potential pathogens that might potentially cause us harm from our bodies. Okay, so we detach potential pathogens from our body. Okay, so that is a protective mechanism for us. Okay. You know, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because while we are detaching these things from the surface of our body to protect ourselves, in the same way, we're throwing microorganisms and dead skin cells off into the air in the room, right? So that means that people in the room that you're sitting next to are ejecting pathogens from their body. And in the next fraction of a second, when you inhale some volume of air in that room, you might put that pathogen in your nostril, okay? Or, you know, a pathogen that you're detaching from your body, well, grandma is breathing that pathogen into her nostril in the next moment. So, you know, there's a double-edged sword aspect to this protective strategy. Okay, folks, do you have any thoughts or questions right now? Okay, all right, let's continue then. Let's continue. All right, so that's done with I'm done with talking about the epidermis. Shay, you're completely grossed out. Good, and I've accomplished my goal today. That's fantastic. All right, so you know, life is somewhat gross, and that's the reality of it. Okay, but you know, we need to take it in stride. Okay, so let's continue here. I'm going to start talking to you about the dermis at this point. So I'm going to make this number 4 in my notes. Okay. Number 5. I'm sorry, number 5. Number 5 in my notes. Okay. The dermis. All right. What can we say about this? The dermis is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, so that would be part of the conversation you may have had as you were studying chapter 4 for your exam. The dermis is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. And that dense, irregular connective tissue contains an abundance of collagen and elastic fibers. Okay, question in the chat window for everybody. Here we go. If there are many collagen fibers in the dermal layer of skin, what type of cell do you expect to find in this layer? Think about what you've learned in terms of the kinds of cells we find in connective tissue. There was a particular kind of cell which is very famous for its ability to produce collagen. What is the name of that cell? It's not a reticular cell, Raquel, but thank you for trying. Anybody else? Okay, Raquel, second time around is the winner, right? Fibroblasts. That's exactly right. You're going to find fibroblasts in the dermis. Fibroblasts make a lot of collagen and secrete it from the cell to form the chains of collagen fibers that make up the extracellular matrix of the dermis. Okay. All right, let's continue here. So the dermal layer, it is obviously the dermal layer does contain, is made of connective tissue. And so the dermal layer itself is going to have relatively few cells with a large volume of extracellular space in between those cells. But among the cells that are present, you will find among the cells present in this layer of skin, you will find fibroblasts, macrophages for defense, and adipocytes, right? Adipocytes for both a physical cushioning, to provide physical cushioning against, impacts to the body. And of course, the adipocytes provide a storage depot for biochemical fuel that the body might live on during times of starvation, when you don't have access to adequate food supplies. That's not necessarily an issue for us in the modern world, hopefully here in the United States, but it could be an issue, right, in some areas of the world that are impoverished. All right. So when we talk about the dermis, I'm going to have you go back to figure 5.1 panel A and take a hard look at that. The dermal layer can be divided into two regions. Okay, the dermal layer can be divided into two regions. Those two regions are the papillary region and the reticular region. And I want to just tell you a little bit about both of those. First, we'll fill in the papillary region. Okay. So some things to notice while you're studying. Okay. Folks, do you see, all right. Do you see in figure 5.1, look at picture 5.1 panel A, and in the upper left corner of the figure, do you see the epidermal pegs and the dermal papillae? The epidermal pegs and the dermal papillae. What I want to point out to you is that the papillary region has its most superficial layer defined by these things called dermal papillae. Okay, if you look at the video window, it's kind of like having your fingers interlocking with each other, right? The fingers interlock with each other. So notice the dermal papillae of the dermis. Notice the dermal papillae of the dermis. The dermal papillae lock into the epidermal pegs above them. And this interlocking helps to ensure good structural integrity between and attachment of the epidermis to the dermis, right? That's the interface there. So it's kind of like having your two hands interlock their fingers. It provides a really solid connection between the epidermis and the dermis. So the dermal papillae, they're part of the dermis. They lock into the epidermal pegs, which are part of the epidermis. And this locking provides very good binding between those two layers of skin. Good structural integrity. Also, notice that the dermal papillae, because of their very nature of being projections that go up vertically, if we were to take a little ball and roll along the outer surface of all the dermal papillae up and down, up and down, up and down, what we would quickly realize is that the dermal papillae actually increase the surface area. They increase the surface area of the dermis. And with a larger surface area, we can do things. So let me show you some of the things that Mother Nature has accomplished with having the increased surface area due to these structures we call the dermal papillae. Okay, so notice that the dermal papillae sometimes contain capillary loops. Okay, take a very close look along the left side of the image, figure 5.1. Do you see the capillary loops? So the dermal papillae can actually be used to store tiny blood vessels called capillaries. They happen to form a loop, so we call them a capillary loop. So what I'm telling you is the very closest or most superficial exposure of your blood supply reaches into the dermal papillae of the dermis. That is as close to the surface of your body as a blood vessel will ever reach. Okay, dermal papillae are used to anchor tiny blood vessels called capillary loops. Capillary loops again represent the part of the anatomy of your vasculature, which gets the closest to the surface. You're never going to find anything closer, okay? So the dermal papillae are used to anchor the tiny blood vessels called capillary loops. Also, if you take a close look, some dermal papillae are also used to store nerve endings, okay? So if you look very carefully, let me ask you in the chat window, in figure 5.1, what color is a tactile corpuscle? What color is a tactile corpuscle? Okay, Noah, thank you. Noah's the first to answer there, and I'm going to run with that because of her time. He says it's a yellowish brown. Yeah, I would definitely agree it's yellow. Yeah, I can see a little brown shading in some of them. Okay. So the point of it is that you see what I'm talking about. If you can identify the tactile corpuscles there, notice that many of them are actually embedded up into the dermal papillae themselves. All right. So the dermal papillae are not only used to anchor parts of our blood supply, they're also used to anchor sensory receptors called tactile corpuscles that provide touch sensations at the surface of your skin. Okay. All right, folks. Any questions about the papillary region of the dermis? The big deal about the papillary region is that appreciation of the dermal papillae and how they're used to store blood vessels and sensory receptors. Okay. Now the reticular region, I'm not going to say as much about the reticular region, but I will point out to you that as you get into the reticular region, you're going to see a variety of things that are actually stored in the reticular region. Okay, you're going to find some blood vessels, right? The capillary loops go up into the papillary region, but certainly part of the blood vessels are embedded in the fabric of the reticular region. You're also going to find things like hair follicles. If you look along the left side of figure 5.1, you notice a giant hair follicle there, where at its deepest part, it is embedded in the reticular region. You're going to find your oil and sweat glands in there. Okay, so lots of these relatively large pieces of anatomy of the skin are anchored in the reticular layer of the skin. Notice the presence of blood vessels, hair follicles, and oil and sweat glands that are anchored in the reticular region. Okay, folks, how you doing out there? You okay? Any questions you'd like to ask right now? Okay, all right, folks. So I'm pretty much done giving you a brief overview of the structural anatomy of your skin. Now we're going to go to the other side of the coin and talk about functions of the skin. Okay, let's talk about functions of the skin. This will be number 6 here. Okay. Well, your skin does a lot of things for us. Okay, we benefit from what our skin is capable of doing. First off would be regulation of our body temperature. The fancy word for this is thermoregulation. Okay, so let's see here. Right now, in terms of your textbook, I am giving you some notes from pages 164 and 165. The major section heading is 5.4, functions of the skin. There are no figures or pictures in this area of your textbook, but if you see a blue colored title around page 164, 165, which says functions of the skin, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, thermoregulation. Okay, so when we say thermoregulation, we're talking about the homeostatic regulation of body temperature. This is a fancy way of referring to the homeostatic regulation of body temperature. Okay, so the basic idea here is that the anatomy of your skin has the ability to adjust the flow of blood. Okay, blood flow into the dermal papillae can be regulated to adjust the volume of blood delivered to the skin. And of course, blood as a liquid is predominantly made of water. And one thing you might recall from our conversation about water is that water is a really good temperature buffer. So when you move blood around, you're actually moving heat around because there's heat embedded in the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules that actually make up the liquid we call water. So when you're moving blood around, you're actually moving heat around. So as you control the motion and volume of blood into a piece of anatomy like your skin, you control the amount of heat that goes into or does not go into that piece of anatomy. Okay. So blood flow into the dermal papillae can be regulated to just the volume of blood delivered to the skin. Realize that the liquid portion of blood contains a lot of heat energy. So controlling the motion of blood also controls the heat delivered to a region of the skin. Okay. We also know that we have things like sweat glands, right? We have sweat glands so that if we overheat, we can actually perspire and produce moisture droplets on the surface of our skin, which will evaporate. That evaporation takes the liquid and the heat trapped in the liquid off the surface of our body, and that cools us down. Okay. The presence of sweat glands also ensures that we have the ability to release heat from the body. All right, so the anatomy of the skin is involved in regulating our overall body temperature. Next. Okay, it's 9:17. Sorry, folks. Okay, so we'll have to pick up here next time. We're doing pretty decent, and we will finish this section of notes. Okay, folks, do you have any questions you'd like to ask before we stop with our note taking? Okay, folks, I'm going to stop the recording.